Hi folks, this is Ela. I'm going to show you how to paint a round object in the way that I think is easiest for beginners. So we're going to have a highlight, which is where the light is brightest, and it's going to be paler and lighter and have less color. And then there's going to be a shadow underneath, where there's an absence of light. You know, it may not be exactly the way that your real object is lit. This is an exercise that's worth practicing over and over again. It's about learning how to have some sort of control with the paint. So I actually have this broken into 6 steps for the shadow stage, and then we're going to go on painting the local color, which is the color of the object. So for the shadow, first we start with by drawing the shape. We're going to mix the shadow color and test it out, number 2. Number 3, we're going to apply water to the shape, saving an oval near the top to help keep that light area up there. Then 4, we're going to paint a row of dots at the bottom of the edge. 5, we're going to clean and dry the brush and smooth the dots out to create kind of a smile shape that comes up to a point on the sides. If you look at a shadow, you'll see how it kind of goes up to a point. 6 is optional. You can dry the edges of that oval area with a towel to create a buffer zone. And what that does is it prevents that shadow from creeping up into your highlight. And it's nice to have like at least an inch, if not more, between where that shadow is and where the highlight is, just so that the shadow doesn't creep all the way up into there. So the first thing I'm doing, like I say, number 1 is I'm going to draw a shape. I'm going to draw a line and make it at least 3, try and get it close to 3 inches across. Don't make your line tiny. If you make it tiny, you're going to have a much harder time squeezing all that information in there. And now I'm going to do an orange, kind of like the one in front of me. Step 2, I'm going to mix a shadow color and I'm going to test it on the paper. So here I've got my palette right here. I've actually put some water in it ahead of time. And I'm going to do a couple of different colors. I'm going to do kind of a purplish color. I think this is called Moon Glow by Daniel Smith, but it's a granulating purple. But you could do Payne's Gray. I'm a big fan of ultramarine blue if you want your color to look like it's outdoors. But yeah, granulating colors tend to work really well for shadows because they don't move around as much. Make it a little bit darker. The downside with granulating colors is you do need more paint for it to really show up. That's better. So it's a very neutral, not a bright purple, but I think it'll work really well with green because purple contains a little bit of red in it, and red and green are complements, so it'll really help anchor that lower area. And for the orange, I'm going to go for ultramarine blue. I don't recommend a blue that leans towards green because it will end up making your object look greenish if there's any yellow in it at all. And both of these colors contain yellow. So we do not want a greenish shadow. We want a deep neutral. Let's dilute that a little bit more. So we're not only testing it, we're making sure, is this what I want? That's better. If it looks too light, you can make it darker. If it's too dark, you can make it lighter. You're not just testing it and going forward without being sure of what you're doing. You know, something kind of in the mid-range. Okay, step 3, we're going to apply water to the shape and we're going to save an oval near the top because that's where our highlight is going to be. So we want it to be up here. We don't want it to be down here. Not in the middle, near the top. Getting the whole thing wet. The whole thing. You want to tilt your head. You want to tilt your paper. You want to look and make sure that there is no dry spots on there. And then we save this oval right here. I'm not getting any water right here. That area stays dry. So everywhere, the whole thing except that oval right up there. We're gonna do the same thing over here. I'm making an oval in that upper third of that line. And then the rest of it is getting filled with water. And I can tilt my head. I can see that the whole thing is kind of shiny and there's some texture on there. Very quickly, I'm going to my paint. I'm going to stir my brush around to make sure that any granulating paint is stirred in and not settling to the bottom. I'm going to do the purple on my lime, and I'm making a row of dots. And you can see the paint is not super strong, but it's not so weak that it disappears. And once I've made that row of dots, I can rinse out my brush. I'm going to dry my brush on some paper towel. And now I can manipulate. See how this is creeping up here? That's not a point. I want it to come to a point on the edges. I can smooth it out, come to a point. So catching those loose bits at the top, going to the edges. And that's pretty good. I don't really need to do anything more than that. If I wanted to make it a little bit darker, I could add a little bit more because it will get even lighter once it's completely dry. But this is very shiny. It's very wet. It's actually pretty good right there. I might stop with that. That's a definite clear, easy to see shadow. This is still plenty wet. I'm going to stir my brush in my ultramarine, making sure that it's completely mixed together and that the particles didn't granulate and settle on the bottom. Doing that same process going along the bottom edge, making a bunch of dots, rinsing out my brush, dry it on a paper towel, and then you can coax the brush back and forth along that circle, coming to a point. And if there's too much paint up there, rinse your brush, dry it out, and then just pick up any paint that you don't want. If I want to put a tiny bit more, I can see this is still very shiny and wet. I could put a little bit more if I want to. But it kind of just blends into that area that I've already smoothed out, which is kind of nice. There's one more step I'm going to do, which is I'm going to dry. I can see where that oval of dry paper is, where it's meeting the wet paper. And I'm just very gently tapping around it because while this shadow looks very far away from this highlight, it will begin to move and creep up towards there. If I presume it's not going to move, I guarantee you it will definitely move. So I'm going to do the same thing on the line. And that just means that that water isn't going to move as fast in that area and you're not going to get a really hard edge right there. I'm going to let this dry and we will do the next step, which is adding the local color. Okay, so I've let these shadows dry out for about 10 minutes and then I dried it with a hair dryer. I'm going to go in now with my local color, which is the physical color of the object. So the local color of the lime is green. Now we're going to go on with the next group of steps, how to paint the local color. We're going to mix the local color and we're going to test it on paper. Then we're going to apply clear water to the highlight area. So the area that we avoided before is the area that we're going to put the water. Then we're going to apply paint around and connecting with that wet area. Go round and round, getting bigger and bigger until the whole shape is filled in. So first I'm going to mix a green. And you know, this is a fairly bright green. I find that the best blue for this green would be a Prussian blue, which looks like this. You can see how that's kind of a greenish blue. So we're going to take that blue and we're going to mix a nice yellow, and you can see how that really turns green very quickly. If all you have is a phthalo blue, I recommend mixing a tiny bit of red or brown or orange, something to neutralize that intensity. I'm going to mix, and then I can go in straight to my Prussian blue. Stir it around. Let's see what that looks like. Could be deeper. I'm going to add more of everything. So I keep going until I have the color I want. I don't just jump in. That's pretty good. Okay, that looks like a lime color to me. Getting my brush clean and wet. Now I'm going to do the opposite of what I did before. I'm going to color in where that highlight is. That's going to keep that area wet. Going to then dip my brush in my green, stirring my brush around, making sure that it's completely full of that green color. And I'm going to connect and paint around that highlight. And it might blur around, it might not be exactly the shape that I want that highlight to be. That's okay, I can change it later. I just color the whole thing in. And you can see how I'm making this blob bigger. There's no lines extending outward. It's a growing blob. Now the whole thing is colored in, and sometimes I like it to put a little extra paint on the bottom just to really make it feel darker. Now I'm going to rinse up my brush, rinse it out, dry it, and if I want to coax this up here, if this is still wet, if this is still shiny, then I can go and just move this around a little bit however I want it to go. I can touch up because this is super wet. If I was to use a less expensive paper, if I were to use a hot press paper, this would not work out as well. It will dry too fast and you wouldn't be able to touch up like I just did. All right, so there's my lime. I'm going to do an orange now. If I want to get an orange that really looks orangey, I need a red that looks like this. You can see how it almost looks sort of orange already. I don't want a red that looks dark or kind of brownish. This red contains blue, and blue is the opposite of orange. So I'm going to dip my brush here in this orange. This is kind of a pyrrole, P-Y-R-R-O-L-E. It looks like this. You can see it's practically orange already. See how when I mix it together, it just looks very similar to this piece of fruit. So now I'm going to mix some orange on my palette. I'm going to see what it looks like. So here I go. I've mixed an orange. Let's see what that looks like. It's a little bit pale. I put too much red in it initially, so I pulled some of it out. And now I'm adding it back in again. That's pretty solid. Okay, so I've mixed my orange. Now I can get my highlight wet, just like I did last time. Now I can dip my color in there and I can go around that oval. So this is a blob that's growing. Go all the way up to the edge. The blob is growing. I'm not doing any zigzags or any lines, but you can see I can color all the way around. Let that orange grow until it goes all the way to the edge. And I don't need to stir it. I don't need to pat it. I just need to get the paint on where I want it. I can rinse my brush out. I can dry my brush. And then I can coax that highlight so it's got a little bit of orange in there. It's not quite so bright. If there's anything over here on the edges that I need to move, I can do that. If I want to make my highlight smaller, I can bring up some of that orange paint and shape that oval a little bit more. And as soon as I think it's okay, I stop. I don't want to mess with it any more than I absolutely have to. This is going to dry again. I'm going to leave it alone for 10 minutes and then I'll hit it with a hairdryer. So now this has had a chance to dry, and now I'm going to put a shadow underneath these two pieces of fruit. And I'm going to go ahead with using purple under the green one and ultramarine blue underneath the orange. I've stirred around my purple, make sure that it is not settled in the bottom of the container. And you know, you can see I got a little bit of a splash that escaped from the lime. I can paint right over that. You can see how I'm making it very wide sort of an oval, and very shallow this way. And it's wrapping around the edge. So it's just that it's going behind the lime. If I want to make it darker, I can add a tiny bit more paint. And if I want to make it really feel like the lime is sitting on that surface, I dip my paint in the green, and I can put just a couple of drops of green underneath. I rinse out my brush, dry my brush with a paper towel, and I can kind of coax that around a little bit. Maybe even take a little bit of that purple back in there. But just having the slightest hint of green will somehow make it feel even more like it's sitting on the surface, because you get the reflective light between the lime and the table. Put a little bit more green in there. Okay, so you can play with that if you. All right, now we have the orange. I've got my ultramarine blue. I'm dipping my brush in the ultramarine blue and stirring it around, because this paint really likes to settle. And this orange is closer to us. It's in front of that lime. Looks kind of odd with a different color shadow. They don't quite exist in the same universe, but I don't care. We're having fun. I'm doing the same thing. I'm making a wide shadow. It's very shallow. It's kind of an oval. I can put a little bit more paint in there as needed. And blue is the complement to orange. So it's nice to it's nice to bring a little bit of that orange, dipping my paintbrush in orange, and just the tiniest bit, just a couple of dots there, rinsing out my brush, drying out my brush, coaxing that orange right and left, maybe dipping my brush in blue again, so that it can kind of, you want it to be mostly blue with just the slightest whiff of orange to make it feel settled. So you get that sense of reflective light between the orange and the table. That's it, guys. If I want to make this a softer shadow and less of a spotlight, I can also just put a little bit of water around there and soften out that shadow. It doesn't have to be a perfect oval. Maybe these two are kind of blending into each other. I don't know. Maybe. You can play around a little bit with your shadow. Hope this demystifies the process of creating a three-dimensional looking round object with a highlight and a shadow. Enjoy. Bye-bye.